I want to make people fall in love with things they don't expect to fall in love with.
This photographer loves a strange kind of supermodel.
They're fine, nothing lost. Get in here, Clay.
They're tiny.
We seeing her?
Go.
Fidgety, and high maintenance.
Most of the world's insects are up here.
But these models do more than look pretty. They keep you alive.
Well, I got to be called Dr. Bugs way back when I was a kid because I was doing nothing but collecting bugs. I wasn't paying attention to my classes. Her only job in life is to attack a big animal like me. Whoa. But I actually did eventually become a doctor of bugs. Uh-oh.
Mark Moffat is an entomologist with the Smithsonian Institution. He travels so much, he's called the Indiana Jones of insects. 3 species have been named after him. He has another job he's good at. As a photographer for National Geographic, he shot life we've never seen. For this assignment, he's shooting life we overlook, but can't live without. Pollinators.
These are animals that spend all day going out and making sure the plants that you eat are fertile.
Their real agenda is lunch, but while dining on nectar, they pick up pollen and track it from plant to plant. Pollination is the accidental miracle of not wiping their feet. 4 out of 5 crops depend on pollinators. Every 3rd bite you take comes from a pollinator. Without pollinators, mankind might never have appeared.
I like to surprise people. So what is pollination? They have a vague idea, but did they know that a mosquito can pollinate a flower, that a mosquito can do good for an orchid? And this story is going to take me around the world, going after a number of strange creatures.
From Madagascar to Hawaii to Panama. Panama is a natural greenhouse, hot and humid, with up to 3 meters of rain a year.
One of the key people here is Dave Rubik, a Smithsonian scientist who specializes on bees. So he's very important because a lot of these bees are gorgeous, but they all look alike to me. He has actually got a bunch of orchids in his backyard, and I prefer to go into the forest and find things in their natural situation, but these orchids are too rare and the bees are too rare, and the bees fly in from the forest and visit his home.
To guarantee the bees show up, Dave even has his own catnip.
This is essence of wintergreen.
Soaked on a cloth, it makes bees make a beeline. The orchid bee is the Romeo of pollinators.
The males put together a bouquet of different scents, and they mix together a scent that they use to attract the ladies. So instead of for food, they use this for sex, pollination for sex.
And they are literally living jewels because they come in different colors.
Bee expert Steve Buckman is one of the few people who've met them.
And most people never ever see those bees because the males go to orchids, an orchid that might be way up in the canopy. Oop, there he goes.
I always tell people if they want to become a photographer, find a subject first that they're in love with, like anthropology or bugs, whatever it is. And that's really the secret for me, because I'm not actually interested in photography. For me, the camera is a microscope. You need a microscope to study insects anyway, so why not bring it with you in the field and you're watching and observing, and anything happens, you just press a button. If you forget that it's a camera, you tend to press the button at interesting times.
Another canopy dweller rarely seen. Even rarer, it has no stinger. Dave's nest mimics the tree hollow used by stingless bees. But they've added their trademark foyer, a narrow tube made of beeswax, to help keep out predators.
I could just sit there and just press the button every time one came out. It was like doing a video game where you're trying to kill the alien and just kept pressing the button. I didn't even have to think for that one.
But few shots are so easy.
Having some difficulties. The butterflies I was hoping for apparently are not active now.
Heliconius, the Methuselah of butterflies.
Most butterflies only live for a few days. This one lives for months because it actually can go to certain flowers that give it the nutrients that allow its survival. Right now there's a problem worldwide with the crash of many species of pollinators, so it's getting harder and harder to find some of these animals. Photographically, it means it's going to be harder to get some species now than it might have been a few years back. We'll see.
Today, Mark's going after a pollinator smaller than a grain of rice. The fig wasp.
Figs are one of my favorite plants because they're all kinds of things that can become figs. Unfortunately, the figs we're finding right now are huge trees. So we had to get up in this crane and get to the figs from above. These cranes, like this one here, are being erected around the world, and they're all doing research in a canopy. Everything is in the trees. Particularly in the tropics, everything's up here around us. All the photosynthesis, all the energy is up here, and all the animals move up with it. And this is where most of the insects are, up here.
Okay, and one more.
The fig is actually a flower inside out, so inside a fig is a bunch of flowers. Then the fig wasp has to get inside there, pollinate all those, and all the babies have to come back out, and a lot of them die inside, which is one reason that figs are so nice and crunchy. Oh, we got wasps. Okay. They have the most amazing life cycle. Fig wasp flies over the canopy after it emerges from a fig and gets caught in the airstream and will blow several miles before it lands on the next fig. Looking around for big figs, and it takes several hours of scooting around in this little gondola to find enough figs. Turning it into a Disney ride.
Mark has good company. His wife, Melissa Wells.
You need a good partner by your side. We sing songs, tell stories. That turns everything into fun. The Olympic Canopy Crane Competition, among the most competitive. And it's time to head back and count our figs before they hatch.
Inside one fig, Mark hopes to catch a pollinator in the act.
Ah, look at this tiny little fig, and it has something in the middle. A few little wasps. They're very hard things to photograph. They're minute. They're basically the size of a speck. Or a fine-looking wasp. The males of the fig wasp never see the light of day. They die inside the fig. We've given the male fig wasp their freedom in the first time. Let's see what they do with it. Probably curl up and die. We're actually getting a wasp emerging. A female coming out. Yep. Yep. Pushing her way out of the fig for the first time, seeing the outer world, and she may be a very, very tiny thing, but I can only imagine that's a pretty magical moment for a fig wasp. Around us here in the rainforest, virtually everything requires some kind of animal to help it reproduce, and there are often different ones for each of these species.
Some plants are strangers to science. A mystery flower with its own bodyguard.
There's an ant here called ectotoma, a red ant that guard flowers everywhere. Plant, by having the ants down there, keeps everything else off its flowers. And things like to eat flowers because they don't have the poisons that are in leaves. Flowers are too temporary, so they don't tend to have many defenses. It's not known what's going to pollinate it, so we're kind of waiting here just to see what even comes in. Interesting. In the rainforest, you have to be on a schedule. Most bees have a pretty tight clock, and their behavior is tied to the opening of flowers, which have a similar clock. There's a lot of flowers out there, and they want to be visited by the right bee. So they make sure to harness the schedule of that bee to their time. Then they don't necessarily overlap with other kinds of flowers. Thinking about it. Thinking about it. That bee did not know what to do with this flower. He's just poking around. We want the real pollinator to come.
But it's a no-show.
We're just thinking the scent of this flower has been washed away by the rain.
The rainforest holds on to one mystery, and a search begins for another.
The problem here in Panama is everything is not at the same spot. We've had drives as long as 10 hours along roads you wouldn't believe in some of these trips for this story. Where we're getting to is a very flat, even, easy part of the road. It will change suddenly and precipitously until we fall into some kind of pit. When I heard roadside drive, I hadn't quite pictured this road.
He's come to find the flowers that attract his elusive butterfly.
They're supposedly up about 100 meters, but they can be anywhere along this road. Hot lips flowers. Nope. Not the right one. Nothing. No flowers. There's one of the butterflies we're looking for, but we're not finding its flowers, and without the flowers we're not going to get the behavior, the pollination behavior, so we're going to look some other places this afternoon because there's no pollination happening this time of day anyway. And then we're going to go anting. Midday ant break. Coming down the limbs of this tree is one of the really amazing social creatures of the planet. More than any lion, tiger, or bear, these ants behave like humans in just the complexity of what they do. A single leafcutter ant nest can eat several tons of leaves a year, but the cool thing is they don't actually eat any of these leaves. What they do is they carry the leaves into the nest, chomp them up, and turn them into a mulch, and they raise fungus on the mulch. The great thing about leafcutters is that they're really organized, and they have a special sanitation squad. The ants inside have these fungus gardens that they grow for food, and the old parts of the garden which contain diseases are carried by those ants to special spots where these sanitation workers take out the trash, and they throw it over the edge, just like people tend to do. When you get older, those trash ants come down here and they stay out within this trash pile, and they chop the little bits of trash to smaller pieces that causes it to break down and kills the microorganisms in it that can cause the disease. So they basically die of starvation because they have no access to the food inside the colony, but it's their job, so they stick with it.
It's like trying to photograph the center of a bowl of black bean soup.
Carrying the leaves is a lot prettier. There are little ants that ride on the ants carrying the leaves because the ants carrying the leaves can't protect themselves, and they can't fight back if a little fly lands on them and lays an egg. And if the egg hatches, the maggot eats the ant's brain and the head falls off. To get a good picture of a small critter, you have to be at its level. It's like photographing children. You can't photograph the tops of their heads like an adult. So to be down with the ants, you have to be down smack on the ground. I figured out how to photograph close-up pictures by using a book on how to photograph supermodels, as if the ants were a little supermodel. Today we went after a tiny gnat, a little midge that pollinates chocolate, the cacao plant. We heard that there was some cacao, chocolate trees, at an abandoned farm. This was more than an hour and a half away, so it was a fair drive. And it ended up being a longer drive than we thought. But I'm going, oh my God, the sun is getting high, we're bouncing around, we're losing our way a couple of times. We finally get to this spot. Projections are we're about an hour late. These little flies are supposed to be active at dawn, so we're gonna see if any of them are still around. We're looking at a cacao tree here in a bit of overgrown old farmland. So these trees haven't been tended for some time, so they've grown taller, but they still have flowers and cacao fruits on them, chocolate, the source of chocolate. And it's another example of a really bizarre relationship, because the chocolate flowers are pollinated by these minute little midges. I saw a fly crawling. We need to say hi. Well, there are reports of flies at this one, but I'm not seeing any.
This trunk here, moving up.
I also saw a paraponera, which is a dangerous ant, so we should know where it is at all times.
Yeah, it's in the ants line newsletter.
Some people who take pictures of small critters bring tons of stuff, but I know that if I see an animal in the field, I got to be able to find the right lens immediately, or that picture isn't going to happen.
A pollinator sighting.
And luckily, it was so clouded over, I don't think these little flies knew that it wasn't still daybreak, and one of them at least was still on a flower, a totally minute fly on a very elaborate little flower. Is it hovering in space there? Is that it between the flowers? Well, usually my assumption is that an animal isn't going to be quite comfortable with me hovering over something like a flower. So I stand back and let whatever action I expect to happen. Then I move in.
That's it. Gone.
We got touchdown. It's the most excitement a tiny fly has ever generated in a group of people. It's nice to be grateful for a fly for chocolate. They get a bad rap for everything else. And it seemed impossible that this glorious chocolate would be the product of such a tiny little creature. The expert on the pollination of cacao said that this was a real tough picture, and we got it in 5 minutes. Woohoo! Getting a little cocky, are you, Moffat?
Mark's last morning in Panama, and his last chance to find a rare pollinator.
Help me! Where are the butterflies? We're going up to the top of this hill where there's supposed to be a bunch of these butterflies hanging out. We're actually looking for things that are rare. That's the essence of this whole story, that pollination is on the decline. It's harder to find things, and we're looking for particular rare instances of things. So you don't expect to find these things every day, and that's the real trick. You need lots of time with nature. It doesn't sign contracts and tell you what it's going to do.
A single hot lips flower, the kind that Mark's butterfly pollinates.
Actually, this is perfect because we know the butterflies come to these flowers. And if there were 20 flowers here, I couldn't position myself to take the picture. So they're funneled to the exact spot we want them. And the best time to actually find things in a rainforest is not when you're walking along fast, but when you're like stopped, like here, and you've been hiking for an hour and you're all sweaty and you can barely see, and you plop down on the trail and your eyes clear, and then you start seeing. That's where I've discovered the most species. But all the butterfly pictures look like they're in focus. Excellent. Pretty impressive that it waits for the last minute, but that seems to be true of so many animals. When you destroy the land that these animals, including pollinators, require, it takes generations to reform a forest like this.
In the next decade, a decline in pollinators could cost the world billions of dollars in lost crops.
And this is one of the reasons that we see again and again in the news a shortage of food in different parts of the world. My personal way of dealing with this is to remind people that there are things that are really beautiful out there. I want to make people fall in love with things they don't expect to fall in love with. To actually appreciate the fact that a mosquito is pollinating an orchid necessary for the survival of a beautiful flower, and make them realize that everything, therefore, is important. Then people will hopefully go out and want to save things. So you end up hanging around a flower for a long time. There are worse places to be. Try this.
Yeah, that's it. Tasty? Do we like it? Is it good? Oh, and you've got bees all around you.